Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 173 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where today we're taking a break from the story to give Frodo a chance to catch some Z's in his boat.
Poor guy, he needs the sleep. He's had a pretty rough time lately.
True.
I mean, there was the spa nightmare with Galadriel's mirror. Sam's so obsessed with his new ropes, he's not talking to anybody, and Boromir's talking to himself, so...
That's not weird.
And on top of all of it, now Frodo has to leave Lothlorien.
Yeah. Well, at least Galadriel gave him a very nice parting gift.
Well, not as nice as the one she gave Gimli, but yeah.
Well, that might be for the best. I'm not sure that adding angry stares from Celeborn to his list of troubles is what Frodo needs right now.
Probably not. No, he's got enough.
You too, short man?
Et tu, Hobbit? But anyway, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I am here with the Man of the West, who speaks truly, saying that we cannot foresee what we might meet upon our road. Alan Sisto.
That is more true tonight than usual, because tonight we have our 11th Questions After Nightfall episode, in which a few of our patrons are online with us here in the common room and have come prepared with some of their very best questions, or worse.
That's right.
I don't know. We haven't asked them ahead of time, so
we don't know yet, because
disclaimer
always,
on the quality of the questions, I just don't know.
I'm sure they're fine, but we don't know
sure
because, as always, we have no idea what they're going to ask us.
That's
Alan
right.
and I are going to be answering their questions as best we can with the resources available to us in our recording nooks, which is always fun, sometimes scary.
Yes, it is.
Scary for us, not for you.
Maybe scary for you. I don't know. I don't know what you fear, but I guess we'll find that out.
A very long hour and a half, I suppose.
Could be. As with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from any possible edits for nervous coughs or time spent flipping through pages as we look for an answer, we will be presenting this as it was recorded live. So everything you hear in the show will have been recorded during this session.
That's right. And if you'd like to get in on the next one, go check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/prancingponypod. We'll be doing Questions After Nightfall episodes every quarter, and we'll be inviting patrons at the Elrond's honorarium tier and higher to join us.
It's just one of the many ways we're saying thank you to our patrons, giving them the opportunity to get to know us a little better, make us laugh, stump us, and more than likely embarrass us, in the best possible way, of course.
Of course.
Now, along the way, we will be referencing as many books as we can to back up our answers. We've each got a few ebooks on our computer here with us.
And I've got a couple of paper books here with me as well, just in case.
Probably Parma Eldalamber on number something, right?
Yes. I've got number 17 right here.
That's what I thought.
I don't have the whole stack, but just number
No.
17 is here. I figure
Always
good
handy.
chance I might need that one.
Okay.
But we want you to remember that all the books we mention on the show are linked in our show notes to each episode and on the official library page of our website, theprancingponypodcast.com.
Well, all except for Parma Eldalamber on 17 is the...
You know,
the whole
I
thing's
realized
out of
that as
print.
I was saying it. I was like, well, that one is out of print, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so we can't
sadly,
link
no
that
option
one.
there.
But
No.
maybe we should put a link to the website up there so people can order the ones that are in print at least.
That's not a bad idea. Now, there are a lot of other things on our website as well. Show notes, book links specific to each episode, really hilarious outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings from way back when we actually had time to do them, and a few other little extras.
That's right. And you forgot the not so funny outtakes. There's some of those up there too.
Oh, there are actually plenty of those, yeah.
Yeah. You'll also find a link to our online storefront at teespring.com/stores/PPP, where you can find shirts, mugs, stickers, and other cool PPP gear. So please be sure to check that out. Now, before we begin, I'm sorry to say we have a little correction to make.
Not even an addendum this time, huh?
No, not an addendum. This is a correction.
No.
Now, this time it wasn't us, but one of our guests who said something in the heat of the moment that we have gotten a lot of feedback about. And this is going back to episode number 166, where we interviewed John Garth. So, yeah, do you remember this, Alan? When we were talking to John, he mentioned Fridtjof Nansen, right? The Scandinavian explorer.
Right.
And I think John had called him a Danish explorer.
Yes.
We got a lot of mail about that.
Yes,
Something
we did,
like that.
mostly from our listeners in Norway.
Yeah. About a dozen listeners in Norway came to us on Facebook, email, I think even on Reddit. Apparently, Fridtjof Nansen is not Danish. He's Norwegian.
Nope.
He's actually kind of a Norwegian national hero.
Yes, he is.
And he was like an amazing guy. I spent a
yeah.
few minutes reading his Wikipedia page tonight. I mean, he was like
Pretty
Arctic
impressive guy.
explorer, Antarctic explorer, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you know, sailing through
Diplomat,
the ice.
humanitarian.
Yeah.
Won the Nobel Peace Prize.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, seriously, like a totally amazing guy.
He do? Yeah.
A totally amazing guy and utterly Norwegian, not Danish.
With a world-class Norwegian mustache as well, I have to say.
He did have a pretty amazing Norwegian mustache. I mean, the dude looks like Floki from Vikings.
He kind of does now.
Except with
a little less
more
psychotic tendencies. Yeah.
Yeah, not as much black eye makeup, but he's got like the big mustache, and oh man, it's pretty epic. But
it is.
So anyway, thank you folks for
Yes.
reaching out to us and correcting us on that. Fritjof Nansen, Norwegian, for the record.
Not Danish. All right.
Not Danish.
Well, now with that completed, let's go ahead and introduce our guests. We're going to start with Jim.
Well, hello. How are you doing?
Doing all right, Jim.
Hi,
How are you tonight?
Doing great.
Doing very well. Went for a run a little while ago. As it's been well recorded by the Sears, I knew Linda Lay when she was Linda Johnson.
Not this again.
Oh, yeah. And her sister Elizabeth, of course, but Beth. The three of us actually, after we escaped from Numenor, participated in a fishing contest that Isildur was holding to boost people's morale. And the waters were still kind of roiled up from the sinking of Numenor, and some very big fish were up there. I caught this enormous striped bass that is, we call it rockfish down here on the Chesapeake Bay. And that wasn't the biggest fish that we caught. That honor went to a megalodon that Isildur himself caught, but it was the Rankin bass.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. Jim, what are we going to do with this, sir?
Jim.
Edit.
Yeah, that was bad. World-class bad right there.
Yeah.
All right.
I have to better myself or worsen myself each time. So
that's true. Otherwise, you're going to have to take a quarter off. You're just going to have to say I passed tonight. All right.
Yeah.
All right. What question do you have for us tonight?
Well, you've just covered the Mirror of Galadriel not too long ago, and what comes to my mind there is a scene where she says, I have to tell you that I'm often been sorely tempted to seek the thing that you offer me, meaning the ring, and now it comes here. Right. Well, that's made out afterwards in Tolkien's letters and in a lot of scholarly articles as being a major test for Galadriel, which she's fortunately passed. That has the feel of retcon to me, because when I read it, it seemed to me like there was absolutely no question that Galadriel was going to pass this up. I mean, she could see that it would be a temptation, but she was far too wise at the tender age of 7,000 to really be tempted to take the ring. So, but what's your opinion? Do you think that was actually a sore temptation and that she might have taken it from Frodo, or do you think that was a matter of retcon later on by the good professor?
That's a very interesting question, Jim. Shawn?
Well,
I don't know. I mean, in a way, isn't Galadriel herself almost a retcon because she was so late in the process in terms of development? I mean, not truly retcon, but you know what I mean.
No, I know what you're saying. She was a late addition to the story. I mean, when he first started writing this chapter, it was King Galdaran. I mean, it was totally different idea that developed as he was writing this chapter. And then he just sort of changed her to who she was, and then inserted her into the backstory. But I don't know if that impacts the answer to this question so much, because again, it's a question of like, once he actually wrote it.
Yeah.
Once he actually wrote her into the story, did he really intend that she was tempted at this time, or did he just decide later on that she was tempted? And maybe, and was that a retcon as he's writing like the history of Galadriel and Celeborn after the fact?
Right.
Is he like going back and thinking like, oh, well, she really was tempted there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just so colored from reading all that other material.
That's
I really do feel like
we've been buried in that for the last few weeks, haven't we?
We have, yeah, and we've spent so much time with the history of Galadriel and Celeborn. We've spent time with the letters. We've spent time in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I feel pretty secure that she is actually tempted there, but
I do too.
I mean, I don't know. Is there anything here in the text that might lead us to believe that she's already kind of gotten past it?
I don't know.
I'm trying to remember.
Let's go back to that moment. I'm going to go ahead and scroll back to.
Let's do that,
the
and
Mirror
then
of Galadriel here. And
let's do that, and then I want to go back to an earlier scene in Book 1 that's not Galadriel. But okay, yeah, let's go back there. You got it in front of you?
Yeah, I do. So she laughs with a sudden, clear laugh, and she talks about, I may be wise, but I've clearly met my match in courtesy. You're revenged for my peering through your naked soul when you arrived. This is the Alan Sisto paraphrase, by the way.
She doesn't often talk about naked souls.
No, but that's exactly what happened. Poor Sam.
Yeah.
She says, I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired to ask what you offer. For many long years, I had pondered what I might do.
Notice the tense there.
Yes, desired, past. For
Well,
many long years,
and
I had pondered.
I had pondered what I might do.
Right. I'm not pondering now. That's a very
Right.
good
Not
point.
I have pondered, as in
Mhm.
I have continued to ponder, but I had pondered. Like once upon a time, I used to ponder what I might do.
And yet she then also uses the past tense to talk about it being here presently. It was brought
Yeah.
within my grasp. So
Yeah.
I don't want to put too much weight in that. She does go on then to talk about the evil devised long ago. Wouldn't that have been a noble deed to set to the credit of his ring if I had taken it by force or fear from my guest? I think we might be reading something here, huh?
There is some stuff there that suggests maybe she has gotten that all this stuff is in the past for her.
The only thing is, remember we talked about this with Aragorn too.
That's the one. You're getting ahead of me, man. That's where I wanted
to
go. Because we talked about this with Aragorn, and I think
Yeah.
back in book 1 at the Prancing Pony, when Aragorn is tempted, I think I had thought that Aragorn was still tempted or no, I can't even remember now. I think I had thought Aragorn was past the temptation, right? And then, but you thought he was still being tempted at that moment?
Yeah, I'd come down to the conclusion that it actually was a present tense temptation, but it was one that he'd anticipated and had dealt with already. I mean, it's not that he wasn't actually tempted. It's that he was prepared for that temptation. And I think that may be what we're seeing here.
And that might be the place where you and we were sort of disagreeing on it. We disagree,
as much as you and I disagree, apparently.
Which is still kind of half agreeing with each other anyway. But maybe it was exactly as you said. No, I'm not going to say it was exactly as you said. Maybe it was a little bit like you said and a little bit like I said.
Yeah.
Maybe
a little bit.
Maybe he had sort of thought about it, was pretty sure that he had gotten past the temptation.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, when the temptation's right there in front of you, you're going to be tempted
fresh.
again. It's just
and that's what happens here with Galadriel, right?
I think very clearly that is what's going on here with Galadriel because I've read ahead a little bit and
then she switches to that present tense.
Yeah.
At last it comes. You will give me this thing freely. And then she gets into that moment of full-blown temptation where she's envisioning the queen, the dark, not the dark queen, the beautiful and terrible queen.
All those exclamation points are significant. All those exclamation points mean that she's really passionate right now. She's really facing this temptation right now. And I mean, Frodo sees it. She's tall beyond measurement. She's beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. This is like her power coming out. It's like kind of straining to kind of like burst out and give into the temptation.
Yeah.
But then she doesn't. She lets her hand fall, and then she's just a slender elf woman, which is one of my favorite phrases. Just
isn't it?
Elf woman. It just kind of makes her seem so human, so normal,
so ordinary. Yeah.
Oh, so ordinary. Yeah. And then she says, "I passed the test.
Right.
I will diminish and go into the west."
I think she knew this test was coming.
I think she studied for it. I think she
correct.
Prepared for it.
She read the Cliff's Notes and the whole 9 yards. She was ready to go.
She was ready for the test.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, she probably was. She probably had gotten through the temptation. But just like Aragorn, and I think we're finding some common ground between these two. I think just like Aragorn, she didn't really know whether she would pass the test until she actually faced it. So maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe she was actually tempted in this moment. I think she definitely was actually tempted in this moment.
I think she definitely was tempted in this moment.
But that she was wise enough to have prepared for it. Yeah.
Just like Aragorn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This was preparation. This was anticipation. And that's what she does mean by pondering what she might do. I know we talked teasingly about that being fantasizing about, ruling a massive land and, having everybody, bow to her. Bow to her. Bow to the queen of garbage, the queen of refuse.
The queen of refuse.
Sorry, there's a Princess Bride.
That's
reference.
A deep cut from Princess Bride, man. I didn't expect that one to come out.
That just came right up. Yeah, I couldn't help it. But yeah, she had fantasized a little bit about that, but I think she'd also pondered what she would do. Would she take it? Would she not? And she was prepared. Now she faces it. She didn't know when or even if she would ever actually face that temptation.
Right.
Though she did, I think, know it when he came into Lorien. I think she was well aware what was going on at that point, and she knew the moment of temptation is coming. So she was doubly prepared, I believe.
I think she probably was even more prepared than we might give her credit for, because
Oh, yeah.
what she probably was not prepared for, and what I think her dialogue tells us she was not prepared for, she was not prepared for Frodo to offer it to her.
No, not at all.
And
that
so
was
the
a surprise.
temptation that she had to come to grips with as she's preparing for this ahead of time, she had to be prepared not to want to take the ring from Frodo.
Right. To take it by force.
Yeah, to take it by force. Yeah, not to be offered it and accept it, but to actually take it from someone who's come into her home as a guest and that she's protecting and all this.
Yeah, there's a scenario I hadn't imagined, basically. I've pondered all these other things. Oh, if it comes here, will I take it? Will I use force? Will I use fear? Will I intimidate? What will I do to get the ring? Will I even try to get the ring? Oh, you're going to give it to me freely. Oh, crap.
Yeah.
That's a real temptation, yeah.
And so she probably sort of girded herself against her own worst tendencies to want to take the ring by force. If, not that she really would have, but again,
of course not. The temptation's there, though.
Yeah, the temptation's there. And she probably really prepared for that and was like, okay, I'm not going to do anything horrible. I'm not going to do anything mean. These are my guests.
Right.
I'm going to keep them safe. I'm going to protect them. And then she, as much as she had prepared, then suddenly
the twist
comes.
Oh,
no, he's offering it to me. How much worse is that? Yeah. Because then you can find all sorts of ways to rationalize that to
Total
yourself.
justification,
Well,
really
I'm not taking it from him by force. He wanted me to have it. He needs my help.
Right.
I'm
just taking it from this poor, unfortunate hobbit. I'm helping him. It's the right thing to do. It'd be really easy to justify it that way, no doubt.
Right. So I think she probably did prepare a lot ahead of time for this possibility. So but then once it came, it probably was even harder than she expected it to be.
I'm sure it was. Jim, it looks like you have a follow-up. Go ahead.
Well, just that I read that moment a little bit differently, and as I put in the text further down, that Galadriel, her mind was pretty much made up that she wasn't going to take the ring. She realized what the consequences would be, and she wanted to give Frodo kind of a stark vision of what the consequences would be. Because remember, he's already once offered it to Gandalf to say, this is too big a matter for me. Why don't you take it over? So it was a warning against shirking the burden that was laid upon him, or that he accepted freely, and also in trusting that somebody else, wiser, more powerful, kinder, would do any better at it than he would.
I would say that that's not out of the realm of possibility, but for the acknowledgement that she gives at the end when she says, I passed the test. It's not, I passed it before, it's I pass it now. And now she realizes at this moment, the ban is now lifted. I will diminish and go into the West. So I think it's only at this point that she realizes what her success against this temptation has given her. But I could be wrong, of course, Jim. That has happened before in the past, I assure you. Arthur, you've got something to say on this as well before we go on to the next question. Fire away, sir.
Yes, it occurred to me that a big deal is made about how one acquires the ring. We are told that the fact that Bilbo took over it by an act of pity as opposed to force makes a difference. And I wonder if part of the temptation, or even if it occurred to Galadriel, is here it's being offered freely. I would even be helping him by taking it off his hands, as opposed to taking it by force. Does this mean I could get away with it, which would make it even more of a temptation?
Right. Ooh,
so I just wondered about that.
That is actually a very good point, Arthur. I think, I'm sure she's well aware that by coming into the ring voluntarily, as it were, by having Frodo give it to her freely, she would be able to wield it with more effectiveness, with less corruption to herself, with less risk of harm, less risk of danger. And so, indeed, that would increase the temptation, I think. What about you, Shawn?
I don't know. I mean, when he offers her the ring, she certainly doesn't react like somebody who seriously thinks that there's not much chance of corruption.
That's
you know
true.
what I mean? Like, she doesn't.
That's true.
She doesn't really think that she's not going to be corrupted by it because he's offering it to her freely.
I guess it's just a delay in the corruption because it's still the one ring. It will entirely corrupt you, and the more powerful you are, the quicker it's going to corrupt you.
But it is and the Gandalf is the same way. When he offers it to Gandalf
can't do it.
Both Gandalf and Galadriel basically say the same thing about how I would from the beginning, I would use the ring to try and do good, but eventually bad things would come of it.
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf says that, Galadriel says it here. Sam says,
Yeah.
you'd put things to rights. And she's like, yeah, that's how it always starts.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
maybe it's what you said out. Maybe she knows that the corruption would come eventually, just not immediately. But I don't know. She certainly doesn't seem to be
No, you're right. She's
of the
not fearless
opinion
at this
that-
point. Right.
Yeah, exactly. She doesn't seem like she's less concerned about the corrupting effect of having it given to her.
No, that's a good point.
But then again, maybe
Yeah.
she just doesn't know. Maybe she doesn't have that information that we have about taking the ring by force versus giving it to somebody.
That is true. She may not. Either way, it seems to me that she is indeed tempted because of the acknowledgement that she has passed the test. But I can see why, especially given the way Tolkien approached this subject and how many times he wrote history after history of Galadriel, that, it could be seen that maybe she was doing this for Frodo's benefit rather than actually being tempted. But I'm going to land on the side that she did. So.
And it is an interesting point about retconning in general, because I do kind of feel like, we talked about this, I feel like towards the end of his life, Tolkien retconned Galadriel as a much less, a much purer figure than she was.
Yeah, she really wasn't the anti-Feanor that she became at the beginning. She was not, I mean, she didn't like Feanor, but she was still terribly prideful, still very arrogant, still very
much so.
Rebellious against the Valar.
Right.
But yeah, by the end, he'd written her differently.
Yeah.
So there was always a lot of retconning going on with Galadriel. That's why it's certainly a very valid question as to whether or not this was
100%.
retconned. I totally get the idea of that, no doubt. Well, Shawn, who is next up in our line?
Okay. Next up, we've got Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. Welcome aboard.
Welcome, Kathy.
Hi, glad to be here.
We are glad to have you.
I am very happy to be here, and I'm calling from North Carolina.
Great.
And I have to confess that I, too, used to skip the poetry.
a kindred spirit, yes.
I've seen the light since for many years now.
Better late than never.
It's funny that you should be talking, well, not so funny because your last episode dealt heavily with Galadriel. And I've always been kind of fascinated, that whole idea that Tolkien developed her character, and you get the feeling that he would have developed it more if he hadn't had to have a deadline at some point to deliver the books.
Right.
So I'm always kind of interested in the sort of Marian, as in the sense of the Blessed Virgin Mary type of influence.
Yeah.
In the way he wrote her, to the point where, she's actually answering prayers.
Right.
Like Sam says, if only I could ask the lady for some light and some water. And shortly thereafter, he gets those two things. And I think there are a couple of other instances of that as well. And I was just kind of curious to hear you guys' thoughts on it.
Okay.
I've only read the books and some of the backstory, but I don't have the depth of knowledge that you guys have.
I wouldn't call it depth of knowledge. We just have more books. But thank you.
Exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is a good question. I'm not sure we're as qualified to answer that as I'd like to be. Shawn, what's your initial take on this? My background is Protestant, so I don't have a lot of knowledge of how Catholics view Mary and all of that. And I know that's not your current status, but you do have some background in that. Do you have any insight to offer us at the beginning?
No, I don't.
Oh, shoot. I was really hoping you would. Oh, no.
I was a Catholic as a child.
Okay.
But I didn't, and I went to a Catholic college, but that's never really got that deep into the theology of it all. Unfortunately, now I feel, because it would be a really great thing to have as
wouldn't it? It would be
reader.
really nice right now, especially when we're talking about Galadriel, because I know I've seen this idea before, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least. Of course, he's going to be inspired by multiple sources, and it does seem, even from an outside observer, that Mary has some influence on how he shaped Galadriel.
Yes, and I do recall that this is brought up in one of the letters. It's a letter.
I think it is.
It was the letter to the Jesuit priest Robert Murray, and I want to pull that up, but I also want to pull up some of our notes for one of our last episodes, because I think we did talk a little bit about. Didn't we talk a little bit about this?
All right, folks, during that brief break, Shawn and I looked stuff up. I know we said we wouldn't edit the show to make ourselves look smarter, but we were just flipping pages in the letters volume, trying to find letters that we knew existed.
Exactly.
We just couldn't find them quickly enough.
And that's where we're admitting that we took a moment to find some stuff.
Yeah, we want you all to know.
You guys would not want to hear us sit here and flip and word search and all that stuff. So
No, it's pretty dull stuff. I'm going to go ahead and start with letter 320, and then Shawn, you've got something from 142, and then I've got a later letter as well. I think these might give us a little bit of insight into this idea, and certainly it's there. So let's start with 320 because it's the plainest statement. This is a letter written in 1971 to a Mrs. Ruth Austin, and he says to her, "I was particularly interested in your remarks about Galadriel. I think it is true that I owe much of this character to Christian and Catholic teaching and imagination about Mary. But actually Galadriel was a penitent." And he goes on to talk about her being a leader in the rebellion against the Valar.
Yeah.
Now, you've got something from the letter to Father Robert Murray.
Yes, this is letter number 142 to Father Robert Murray. This is we reference this letter a fair bit, actually. This is the Jesuit priest who was a friend of the Tolkien family. Mm-hmm. And he had written to Tolkien with a number of Catholic-type questions, theological questions. And one of the things that he wrote about, according to the preamble note in the letters volume, he says that he wrote that the book left him with a strong sense of a positive compatibility with the order of grace and compared the image of Galadriel to that of the Virgin Mary. So again, that's Father Murray making a connection between Galadriel and Mary. But then here's Tolkien's response. He says, "I think I know exactly what you mean by the order of grace, and of course by your references to Our Lady, upon which all my own small perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded. The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work." We quote that one a lot.
That's the famous quote. Mm-hmm.
"Unconsciously so, but consciously in the revision. That is why I have not put in," and then he goes on with all that stuff about, that's why I didn't put in any specific religion or worship practices or anything like that.
Yeah, that's why we don't see religious practices, like you said. We don't see church services or anything like that.
Right, exactly. But then he gets to something at the end of that paragraph that we don't talk about a lot, but I think we do need to bring in here. He says, "For as a matter of fact, I have consciously planned very little, and should chiefly be grateful for having been brought up, since I was 8, in a faith that has nourished me and taught me all the little that I know, and that I owe to my mother, who clung to her conversion and died young, largely through the hardships of poverty resulting from it."
Right.
So I want to come back to that in a moment, but first, you've got one more letter in front of you, right, Alan?
Yeah, I do. And I know I said it was a later letter, but it's actually not. It's an earlier letter, my mistake. It's letter 213, written in 1958. This is from a letter to Deborah Webster, who had apparently asked for some facts about himself, because the opening line is, "I don't like giving facts about myself other than dry ones." But he does eventually go on to say about some facts about himself, like, "I dislike French," or "I was born in 1892. Then he says, "Or more important, I am a Christian," which can be deduced from my stories, "and in fact a Roman Catholic. The latter fact perhaps cannot be deduced, though one critic, by letter, asserted that the invocations of Elbereth and the character of Galadriel as directly described were clearly related to Catholic devotion to Mary. Another saw in Waybread viaticum and the reference to its feeding the will," and he goes on to talk about that a little bit. And we actually referenced that letter in a recent postscript, I think, talking about, no, that was actually a recent episode. It was in our sidebar on Limbus, wasn't it?
Might have been, yeah.
We talked about how the roadies for Journey should just put viaticum on there.
Right.
That was a terrible joke.
That's right. We did some word nerdery on viaticum and Limbus. Yeah.
But interestingly, we didn't talk about the Galadriel thing there. But there, of course, Tolkien's not actually saying or admitting anything of his own. He's just acknowledging that a letter writer once observed that the description of Galadriel was related to Catholic devotion to Mary. But he also notably does not say
and he probably was
false.
referring to Father Murray, actually.
I think he was.
Because the Father Murray letter was his response was 1953. So
right. So yeah, that was just a few years before. Mm-hmm.
So I really think that although the letter 320 especially, I mean, he comes right out and says, I probably owe a lot of Galadriel to my perception of Mary.
Right.
But looking at letter 142, I think he explains a little bit about what that means. He talks about how it was not a consciously Catholic work. The Lord of the Rings wasn't. It was sort of consciously in the revision more Catholic. But at first he wasn't intentionally putting any explicit Catholic theological content in it. But he's a Catholic. This is his life, and this is what he writes. And so
that's correct.
I think that really sort of explains it. You know, he says, Our Lady, upon which all my own small perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded.
Mm-hmm.
I dare say that, if his perception of Mary is sort of the foundation of his idea of beauty, but, beauty in a sense that goes beyond the worldly, then yeah, I think it makes perfect sense that he would just sort of naturally write Galadriel that way. Now, again, because I don't know what Tolkien felt in his heart about Mary, I probably should poll some Catholic listeners, Catholic friends about this and just kind of get their thoughts on it, what it means to them in their faith. But certainly in his own words, the Virgin Mary was a majestic and beautiful figure to him, and a very important figure to him spiritually. And so
clearly,
I suppose it makes sense that he bases Galadriel on all this. And I think that gets to the heart of why he struggled with the idea of her as this rebel later on.
Yeah, that would explain why he retconned her into a much more,
a purer figure.
A penitent, like he said, that she had done this thing and now she's making up for it. She's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. So I think there's, Kathy, to get back to your question, there's definitely a lot there. I think there's a lot that Tolkien maybe wasn't even all that conscious of while he was writing. Maybe he was more conscious than he lets on.
In the revision, as he said to Father Murray.
Yeah. I think he sometimes hedges his bets a little bit in the letters.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever you bring to that as a reader, and you say, "Oh yeah, this feels like Mary to me," I think that's perfectly valid. I think that's applicability that I think Tolkien would absolutely support.
That's the word I was looking for right there. Applicability. It's not allegory, but certainly the reader has that privilege, right?
Right. But I think it was for him. I think something he recognized that this was actually an influence on me, maybe more than I realized. And again, it was going back to allegory versus applicability. It's not that he was intentionally writing Galadriel as a Marian figure, but that this is just the ideal of otherworldly grace and otherworldly beauty and all those other things that I think he was trying to make Galadriel. And so I think that makes a certain kind of sense.
I think it does. Well, Kathy, did we answer that? We kind of danced around it a little bit. I hope you understand, but any follow-up?
Yeah, I think you guys did very well.
Okay.
Especially pulling up those sources really quickly. Obviously she's not a one-to-one correspondent.
True.
Doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence with Mary, but you can see the influence of Marian theology on Tolkien's writing of Galadriel. So thanks.
You're very welcome.
You're very welcome.
And thanks for being patient with our lack of knowledge in that particular area. I appreciate you just letting us have the professor speak for himself. Thank you.
You guys just need to stretch. That's all.
We have one of these days we'll get a chance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Shawn, who's next up?
All right, next up is Dan.
I'm Dan. I'm from Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
And
my question deals.
Wow. Well played, sir.
Yeah, I got to do it at least once. I think I might be your first Canadian person on the show, maybe so far.
Might be.
I hope so. All right, so my question pertains to the Silmarillion and the fating of the Elves. So I want to start by just reading the last sentence from the Silmarillion of the Doom of Mandos. And it goes, "And those that endure in Middle-earth and come not to Mandos shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane, and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after.
Yeah.
The Valar have spoken." All right, so when I read that, it seems like this is like a type of punishment for them that, because of the king slaying that happened just before that, that here's your doom, this is happening to you. And it seems like more of like a parting shot, kind of like, like the Mandos is sticking a dagger into them and twisting a little bit. All right, you're going to go to Middle Earth forever, and when you're there, you're going to wane as well.
Yeah.
So my question is it only the dispossessed, the exiles, that this waning happens to, that the Morroquendi, that they don't fade? Because I think back to Legolas when he's in Dol Amroth, A Return of the King, and it's the seeing of the sea. He saw the sea, and that's what kindled that desire in him to want to go to the west. And soon as Aragorn passed away, then Gimli and Legolas are like, "All right, peace out, Middle Earth, we're out."
Yeah, we're done.
So that's my question: is is the Morquendi, like the Sylvan Elves, the Avari, the Sindar. They don't fade. It's only the Noldor who left and had the doom of Mandos proclaimed to them.
Okay, that is a very interesting question, Shawn. Wow, where do we start on that? I'm not sure that the Morquendi, I believe they fade. I think there's a ton of evidence. I just have to start pulling it up.
There is. It's going to be in Morgoth's Ring.
Yeah, and I don't have that handy.
And I don't have that in front of me, but there's a lot of stuff in Morgoth's Ring about fading of the elves and, well, just all about this stuff. And there are many hints in there that this is something that the Avari are subject to as well.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the idea, and again, I wish I had the text in front of me, but the idea is really very much that sort of the human memory of elves and fairies in modern folklore is based on Avari who faded and who are remembered by humans. Again, remember that Tolkien was always writing this as the prehistory of our world, and he was really trying to reconcile fairy literature with with his own mythology. And so that is something that comes up in Morgoth's Ring, and I just don't have it in front of me, unfortunately.
I don't have Morgoth's Ring in front of me either. It's in a 3-volume copy of History of Middle Earth. The book is rather heavy and large. But I believe.
But I think what you'd find, I guess the last thing I'd say on that is, I think what you'd find is that if you think through the fact that the Eldar basically all sail into the west, and it's only the Avari who stay behind, I think you'd find that Tolkien would say that it is the Avari who have faded that are those elves that we remember from folklore and fairies and things like that. And so
that's correct.
And so again, contrary to the idea that the Avari don't fade or the Morquendi don't fade, I think you would say that our stories preserve a memory of Avari who have faded.
That is correct. I agree wholeheartedly on that. I would say that the statement there, that the doom of Mandos isn't that you will fade and nobody else will. It's that you, Calaquendi, who should never have faded, will now fade like the Avari do. Because you are now like them. You will become as shadows of regret before the younger race that will come.
I think that could be it, because I think the idea was by bringing them to the Undying Lands, they were going to be spared the worst of that fading.
That's correct. And I don't think the Vanyar are fading, for instance.
Right. Yeah.
Or the Noldor that stayed, the handful that stayed. This is, fine. You want to be like the Elves of Middle-earth? You want to be like those guys who didn't follow the summons, who didn't come here? Fine, be like them. You're going to be like them. You're going to fade. You're going to fade just like they do. And you're going to really become burdened down with this weight of weariness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's less about sticking a dagger in and more about observing the natural consequences of your actions. This is not a punishment, I'm going to ground you for the next 10,000 years. It's more like, by the way, as a result of doing this, as a result of rebelling against this authority and going to Middle-earth and doing this thing, you will fade. It's going to happen. We're not telling you this as a punishment. We're telling you this as a consequence. This is just the natural thing that follows.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I would say that we know it's not a punishment because the idea of the Eldar fading was always part of Iluvatar's plan.
Right. That's
Tolkien
correct.
even says, while you were talking, Alan, I was looking this up.
Oh, nicely done. That's what we're supposed to do here on these episodes.
Yeah. This is letter number 153 to Peter Hastings, another Catholic correspondent of Tolkien's. He was the Catholic bookstore owner. So I think we've managed to hit on both of the two big Catholic theology letters in this episode. But he says in that letter, he's actually talking about the entering of elven blood into humans. And he says, the entering into men of the elven strain, through Beren and Luthien and Tuor and Idril, Aragorn and Arwen, is indeed represented as part of a divine plan for the ennoblement of the human race from the beginning, destined to replace the elves.
Destined.
Now, he doesn't say fade there, but he does say that from the beginning, men were intended to replace the elves. Well, replace them as the dominion holders over Earth.
Correct.
And that is because the elves were always meant to be here, do their thing, and then go away.
Right.
So fading is not a punishment. I think it is, as you said, Alan, I think that the Valar were hoping to spare the Eldar the worst of that fading by bringing them to the Undying Lands.
Right.
And and those that sort of turned their backs on that gift and went back to Middle Earth, they're the ones who are going to fade as a result of this. But again, it's not a punishment. It's just, look, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
You go back to Middle Earth, that's what's going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Here, you would have been able to avoid that fate.
Mm-hmm.
There, you're going to join in the fate of the Avari and fade.
Yeah.
All right. Dan, do you have a follow-up to that, or are you good?
No, yeah, they answered it pretty well. It's just I didn't read like Morgoth's Ring, any of those extended versions. All I know pretty much is like the published works, and just by going off of that, you can see how someone would ask a question like that.
Oh yeah, of course.
But
no, it's a good question, Dan.
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. But yeah, in Dol Arthur, he mentioned in the chat in Dol Amroth, like was it? I forget the prince's name right now. It escapes me.
Yeah, it was
Legolas
Mithrellas and Imrazor. Yeah.
It was mentioned that he didn't have a beard. He was more elf. He like Legolas mentioned. You seem elf like distant kin. So it's probably more elf-man relationships than just the big ones we know about.
Yes, absolutely. And I saw Arthur say that in the chat, and I was going to bring that up as soon as I had a chance, but Dan beat me to it.
I beat you.
Yes, I know we got busted for that way back in season 1, saying that there were only the 3. I know I mentioned 3, but that's because I was talking about Tolkien's letter, where he's always referring to those as
Tolkien
the big 3.
refers to those 3. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think we've changed our tune. We recognize that there are some others out there like Mithrellas and Imrazor, but when Tolkien talks about it, he usually talks about the big 3, which is Beren and Luthien, Tuor and Idril, and Aragorn and Arwen. And those are the 3 that he's talking about in that letter when he's talking about the ennoblement to the human race, which is why I brought them up. But yes, there were at least that one other one, and probably many others. Yeah.
Probably there might be some truth to that whole fairy wife thing, but one of the hobbits having a fairy wife. Who knows?
Maybe. You never know who they're knocking boots with, man. I don't know.
Very short fairy wife.
Very short. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, Shawn, who's next up?
All right. Well, next up is Arthur.
Arthur. All right, sir. Welcome back. How are you tonight?
Very good. My name is Arthur, and I am, as always, calling from Baltimore, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing I want to say is I have been known to make the rare and occasional joke or pun relating to Tolkien. I must bow in worship at the words that Jim gave us earlier tonight. I am not worthy.
He is on a roll, isn't he?
He is.
Oh, absolutely. And I did have several questions prepared tonight.
Several.
Obviously won't get to all of them, so I'm going to pass on the first question I thought about.
Okay.
Which is whether Sauron was Faramir's wingman, and all of the War of the Ring was a setup so that Faramir would be in a position to whisper the words "darkness everlasting" into Eowyn's ear. Not going to go there.
Wow, I like that though. I like that. All right.
How far would you go for me, man? I really want this girl. How far would you go for me?
Darkness everlasting. That's awesome.
And who would know that line would work on her? Anyway,
right,
true.
Having said that, there's something that's bothered me since the first time I read The Lord of the Rings approximately 10,000 years ago.
All right.
The shards of Narsil are precious. They're an heirloom. They are treasured and kept in Rivendell, along with the Ring of Felagund and I don't know what else.
Yeah.
They're precious, so to speak.
Right.
Aragorn is a mighty warrior who says the enemy has tried to lay traps for him. He's got to be ready at any moment to fight. But what do we see in Bree right after we hear the little bit of doggerel that Gandalf quotes from Bilbo, and Aragorn stands up, puts his hand on the hilt of the sword that's in his scabbard, pulls it out, and it's a broken sword.
Right.
Number one, if that's Swords of Narsil, somewhere the alarms are going off at Rivendell, and Elrond's saying, "Oh my God, what if he loses a piece out there?"
Right.
On the other hand, it might be a fake broken sword he's carrying just to impress people. But on the other hand, what happens if he runs into the Witch King or a bunch of orcs and he reaches and pulls out a sword and goes, "Oh no, this is the broken one"? What the heck is with him having a broken sword in his scabbard? Seriously, it just does not make sense.
No, I mean, it certainly, if that's his only weapon, it doesn't make sense. I have to start by assuming he's got 2 scabbards, one on either side, and he pulled the one for show, which just has the hilt and the broken base of Narsil.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there, Alan, because
okay, please do.
Remember the Zimmerman letter? What is it, letter 200?
Zimmerman, yes.
I actually found this. I think it's letter 200. I found something from one of our notes from a previous episode. But Zimmerman actually had Strider whip out a sword. And Tolkien responded, Strider does not whip out a sword in the book. Naturally not. His sword was broken.
Oh, boy.
So I think we talked about this in season 3. I think we talked about the idea that Tolkien Strider didn't carry a weapon, apparently. In book 1 of Lord of the Rings. Like, Aragorn did not have a weapon, which seems incredibly impractical to go out ranging without a weapon.
Highly impractical, or at least at that moment. I mean, he clearly had one earlier. I mean, he didn't fight for Theoden's grandfather.
Well, no, I'm talking about now. Yeah, I'm talking about at this point. Yeah, I'm sure he had a functional sword when he was out there being Thranduil and all that stuff. But
right.
But at least in book 1, when he was out ranging, he was just carrying the broken one. So I guess he didn't have.
I guess he didn't expect to have to fight with a sword. He knew that a battle against the Nazgul was not going to be won with a sword.
I think that's it. I think he knew that swords were no use here.
No use here. This sword is of no use here. Yeah. But is he carrying the shards, or is he just carrying the hilt and the last bit of it that's attached to the hilt with the rest of the shards in Rivendell?
Safely back in Rivendell?
He's not carrying a bag with a bunch of loose bits of metal, I hope. That does
a bunch
seem
of
a little
loose, sharp
silly.
bits of metal? Yeah. I
don't know.
I think you're right. And I think to Arthur's point, yeah, hopefully he's not carrying all the little bits and pieces, because, man, you're going to lose one of those for sure.
Yeah, you really are. That's not exactly helpful.
I think when we talked about this last season, and I think it was just a quick discussion, maybe a little sidebar, maybe it was a mailbag bit, but I think we talked about the idea that maybe he didn't usually carry around this ancient heirloom, that maybe he had just gone to pick it up as a token of his identity. And that maybe
could be.
Maybe he knew that he was going to, he was going to go look for Frodo. He wanted to have,
he needed proof.
He wanted to have some evidence of his identity. Maybe he knew that Bilbo had written the poem about him. Maybe he even knew that I don't think he knew that Gandalf had told Frodo much.
No,
I don't know if he knew that Gandalf had shared the poem with him, but maybe he knew that, look, this is a token of my identity, and I'm going to need it.
Well, of course,
we
that
might
doesn't
have
mean
even
he didn't
joked
have
about
other
him
weapons.
stopping at Rivendell to pick it up.
Yeah, I like that idea. But it still doesn't mean he didn't have any other weapons. Tolkien obviously says he didn't whip out a sword because he's not. What did he say? Did he say he doesn't have any weapons, or did he just said he didn't whip out a sword? Let's get that actual quote.
He just says he didn't whip out a sword.
Naturally not. His sword was broken. So, he's probably got a dagger, maybe even an axe or something like that for chopping wood in the forest. So he's going to have some sort of way to defend himself other than this,
but
hilt
remember,
with a few inches of blade.
That's probably a fair assumption. But remember, on Weathertop, he doesn't pull out a weapon.
Well, again, that's because he knows who his enemy is. He knows that there's no point to using a blade against these guys.
Yeah, that could be.
Interesting, though. Yeah, that is... Boy, I really fell into the classic trap there of just assuming that he had another sword. But good catch. Tolkien said he didn't whip out a sword because he didn't have one. His sword was broken.
I thought for sure you were going to say that you fell victim to one of the classic blunders and that you got involved in a land war in Asia.
Yeah, or that I went in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
That would be inconceivable.
That would be inconceivable indeed.
But it's a good question, and I do think, I have to think Aragorn didn't carry the broken sword all the time.
Oh, he couldn't have, right?
He couldn't. He could not. That would just be so irresponsible.
Future king loses sword. Yeah, that's just a bad idea. I can't see that happening.
That's like, going out on a hike with the royal jewels.
Yeah, taking the crown jewels with you on a walk
one
around the park.
One of the princes,
Right, by himself.
Prince Harry walking around with the royal jewels.
Not a wise idea. No, I'm pretty sure that Aragorn didn't do that often, and he did that, like you suggested, possibly because he knew he would need some sort of evidence to back his claim.
Yeah,
that he was who he said he was.
Yeah.
Arthur, did you have a follow-up on that at all?
Well, a couple of thoughts occurred to me while you all were talking. First of all, it is true when I think back on it, in all of Book One, when you see Aragorn fighting, he's waving torches because the Nazgul don't like fire.
Right.
And you see him waving a lot of torches, but it's true he doesn't wield a sword. The other thing is, when he's in the room at Bree, he never says, by the way, this is Narsil. Right. He just pulls out and says, it's a broken sword, and says, it's not much use, is it? He doesn't pull out a broken sword and say it's Narsil until the Council of Elrond, at which point you've had a chance to go raid the storeroom.
Well, yeah.
So presumably in all of Middle-earth, there may be more than one broken sword.
That's true.
And maybe Elrond says, you want to impress people, here's an old broken sword that's a leftover from 3 weeks ago. Right. But leave the important one in the storeroom. So what can I say?
That's an interesting thought.
The idea that he might just be carrying around like a broken, like just
a totally junky sword just because. That's pretty funny. I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. All right, Shawn, who do we have up next?
Okay, next up we've got Lori. Welcome, Lori.
Hi.
Welcome, Lori. How are you tonight?
I am fantastic. How are you guys? Obviously, we've all been talking for a while, so you're great.
Good. Well, we're glad you're here. Where are you calling from tonight?
Well, I'm calling from the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, just north of Seattle.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have like tree beard and Ents around me at all times.
Yes, you do.
It's fantastic.
Excellent.
So I have so many questions. But I thought since this
Start with one.
I'm going to try. Well, this is my first time here, so I thought what I would do would be to offer you a choice. Do you want a question fairly detailed about the nature of evil, or kind of a fluffy throwback question to The Hobbit?
Well, how about you submit that detailed one for a Barnum's Bag question and throw us the fluffy one tonight?
Oh, you're
what do
so
you think,
smart.
Shawn? Do you vote with me on that one?
Yeah, we'll do that.
I was going to say give us the tough one, but
thanks a lot, Shawn. I like fluffy.
I've
in a
got
fluffy
one
mood tonight.
in the bag that we've talked about on email a little bit, something about tree beard and light and things like that. So,
yes.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that later. But you know what? Let's go ahead and go to The Hobbit. So this question has to do with Elrond and the Woodland King, the Elven King, who shall not be named.
Ah, yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they're different kind of elves. Right. We know this, and you spent a lot of time talking about that during the Hobbit episodes. But I wonder, why didn't Elrond send a message to the king in the Woodland Realm, letting him know that these dwarves were on their way? Or did he and the Woodland King didn't care? Or did he and the Woodland King did care and was on the lookout for these dwarves because they're horrible, stunted people?
Because they're dwarves.
Because they're dwarves. What do you think?
I mean, we talk about Celeborn and his casual racism. That's nothing compared to Thranduil.
Yeah.
I mean,
Thranduil's got, he's like sharpening the blade. He's like, oh, they're dwarves to kill? Yes, let's kill some dwarves.
Oh, there are dwarves coming. Thank you so much, Elrond. We'll show them our very best hospitality. Get the knives! And the thongs. Don't forget the thongs.
Actually, we're probably being a little bit hard on Thranduil with that. He doesn't.
Or I should say on King name not appearing in this film.
I know.
But
I know. Definitely when I think of like Lee Pace in the movies that shall not be named. Nothing against Lee Pace. But just the way the character was written, it was he was very much about, hey, let's kill some dwarves. All right.
Right. Oh, goodness. That's a very interesting question. Did Elrond send messages? If he didn't, why wouldn't he? Is it perhaps that, simply put, the Woodland Realm is not necessarily allied to the rest of the elves in Middle-earth? Sort of like, they're sort of they're that weird cousin nobody ever talks to at the family reunion. And we don't talk to them, so we're not going to send messages. Or we've tried to send messages before and they just ignore them. I don't know. What are your thoughts,
That could
Shawn?
be, or, I was thinking even simpler than that. Maybe he didn't send messages to the Elven King because he didn't expect the dwarves to go through there.
That's a very good point. At that time, where were they going to go? They were going to take that road that was more in the middle of Mirkwood, north-south.
Right. They
only
didn't
after
know,
they got to
I think,
Beorn did they know.
Until they talked to Beorn, did they find out that, that road's no good anymore?
That's a very good point. Yeah, why would I say to somebody in Salt Lake City, hey, keep an eye out for my brothers if I think they're going on I-10 through Texas?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's actually, that might be the very simple answer. Leave it to me to try to find a more complicated one.
Well, I mean, I like the speculative nature of the more complicated one. I mean,
of course,
I love the idea that.
Well, then let's speculate a little bit there. Was Elrond allied
let's say
with?
That's probably the Occam's razor answer, which is that he just didn't expect him to go through there. But what if he had sent a message to the Elven King? And the Elven King just ignored it, or the Elven King just said,
would the message have even gotten through? In other words, I don't think he would have been using Osanwe, so we would have been sending traditional messengers. And Mirkwood is a pretty dangerous place, even for Elven messengers, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, that's a good point, because, I mean, let's think about it. We know that Elrond sends messengers across the Misty Mountains in Fellowship of the Ring, because that's the ring quest. That's a world-changing quest. That's a really important thing. So of course he's going to send messengers out there because this is critically important. This is just a bunch of dwarves going to try and reclaim the Lonely Mountain. I think Elrond is a wonderful host, and he shows hospitality to his guests. He gives them some advice, helps them read the map and all that good stuff. But he's, is he really going to send messengers across the Misty Mountains through Mirkwood, all these dangerous places for this? Probably not. Maybe it's just not important enough to risk sending messengers.
That is a very good point, that it's just simply not high enough on the priority chain to require sending a message, especially when the risk of the messenger being killed in Mirkwood or in the Misty Mountains is exceedingly high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And plus Elrond, knowing what we know from the Lord of the Rings, we know that Elrond knows who's really in Mirkwood, in the south of Mirkwood.
He knows who it is.
Stirring up trouble. So does he want to risk sending elves from Rivendell that might be intercepted by Sauron? Probably not.
No, probably not at all.
Not for these dwarves. And again, not knowing that there's probably a very slim chance that they're going to find themselves in the north of Mirkwood anyway.
That's true. And it's not because they're dwarves. It's because their quest isn't a particularly interesting quest in comparison to the ring. It's not make or break for the rest of the free world. This is just a bunch of dwarves out for some revenge. And we don't have to paint Elrond as a, Celeborn level casual racist or a
that is not what I meant to
level.
say at all, but thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
I know. I just want to make sure we understood that. So I think that there's our speculation.
But now let's ask the question, what if Thranduil had gotten the message?
Oh, this is the fun speculation, isn't it?
Yeah. Elrond, let's imagine that Elrond did send a message. He took the risk.
Dear King of the Woodland Realm.
Yeah. Please
it has come to my attention that the following dwarves, led by Thorin, will be arriving in approximately 3 weeks. Please provide them with food and passage through your realm.
Yeah, and don't throw them in prison.
Or barrels. Well, they didn't throw them in barrels. They climbed in barrels willingly, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah.
What does Thranduil do with that? I mean, aside from file it promptly in the dustbin.
Well, right, exactly. Elrond sent me another message. Does he think I care?
I mean, he probably thinks, there are dwarves coming. I don't like dwarves.
And
then we get that whole thing about
dwarves.
And then we get that stuff that we get in chapter 8 about the bad blood between elves and dwarves.
Right. Which is clearly a callback to the whole Thingol story.
Right. And it does tell us that, those weren't Thorin's dwarves that had that little issue with the elves, but still the Elven King is not fond of them for that reason. And so maybe he gets the message and he says, let them
come.
If they come, then I don't know. Maybe we'll see what we do. Maybe if they come knocking on my door begging for help, maybe I'll help them. Maybe I'll charge them,
Maybe I'll give them free housing for a very long time.
Well, or maybe he says, okay, I'm going to see how this plays out. If they come knocking on my door and saying, hi, we're here to go retake the Lonely Mountain. Can you help us? Maybe he'd help them, but that's not how he finds them. He finds them,
right?
He thinks, trespassing in his woods,
raiding his parties. Yeah.
Yeah, and raiding his parties. And so that becomes his excuse to say, oh, well, they didn't come and ask for my help. They trespassed on my land. And so
I'm sure these are the same dwarves Elrond told me about, but they're not telling me that Elrond sent them. So too bad. I'm not going to treat them any differently.
Yeah. I mean, I don't for a moment believe that really happened.
No.
I do think that Elrond did not send a message for the reasons we discussed, but it's a fun speculation on what the Elven King might have done if he had gotten that message. And I tend to think he probably would have still done exactly what he did because of the way that they trespassed.
Mm-hmm. I agree as well. I don't think he would have treated
them
any differently.
They certainly didn't mean to. They were starving, but
what were you doing in the woods? Starving. That might be one of my favorite lines. It's such an understated, snarky sort of sarcasm from Thorin.
It's a really fun, dry humor moment for sure.
It is. And we don't get a lot of that dry humor like that in The Hobbit, at least. So, all right, Lori, do you have any follow-ups on that, or are you good?
No, I was just kind of thinking if Elrond had sent a message, then it's a really nice excuse to just throw some dwarves in your dungeon for a while and accuse them of starving loudly.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think you may indeed be right. No doubt about that.
Like, yes, free dwarves.
Oh, good. Yes, we have plenty of room in our dungeons. We've freed some orcs to give up some space.
I mean, I know he wasn't around in the first age, but he's probably, at least part of him is thinking, yes, I remember when we used to hunt the petty dwarves in the first age.
That's right.
I won't have to hunt them anymore. They'll come to me.
That's right. And I won't let them stab me, in the kneecaps from while I'm wearing the Silmaril.
Right.
Stabby stab. All right. Shawn, I think next up is Chad, right?
That is correct.
All right, Chad, fire away.
Chad from Texas.
Welcome, sir.
Hello, Chad.
Thank you very much. I have an interesting question about oaths versus vows. There are instances of characters swearing oaths or vows in the Legendarium and being practically physically bound to them almost, like the Oath of Fëanor, Gollum's Oath upon the One Ring, the Númenórean swearing to Sauron, and so forth. The connection to Beowulf and Anglo-Saxon culture is strong, but the question would be, what are your thoughts about oaths in the Legendarium? What are examples that you think of oaths versus vows? The differences and the commonalities between the oaths versus the vows, and the connections to Beowulf and Norse mythology.
Leave it to Chad to ask a really hard question.
I'm really glad you took the Hobbit question.
I know, aren't you? Well, folks, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We are out of time.
Wow. So let's see. Do we have... I think the first thing we need to do is we need to look at when the word oath is used versus when the word vow is used.
Right. I think
now
so
I have some word nerd thoughts on that.
Okay, why don't you start with that while I start looking
No,
through...
I want to see how he uses the two words first because
Okay.
Because I want to see if it supports my theory before I put my theory out there.
I want to make sure I'm right before I say anything. Yeah.
No. I will go ahead and say that the word nerd thing is that as you're saying the question, Chad, right away my mind goes to oath is an Anglo-Saxon word. It comes from Old English. Vow is a Romance word. It comes from Latin. It entered into the English language with the Normans. Mm-hmm. And just, Tolkien being Tolkien, and we know that the way he usually plays things, he does tend to use the Germanic words when he can, and every once in a while he'll give us a Latin or a Romance root word for a special reason. Either it's, like the Gondorians tend to speak in a lot of Romance language words, and I think it's just a sort of a marker of, I think it's really just kind of a cultural thing for them. They tend to speak in more Romance language words, whereas like the Rohirrim speak almost entirely in Germanic words.
Right.
So I'm kind of curious, first of all, to find out if that might explain the difference between oath and vow, and maybe it's something like that. Or is there something deeper there? Is Tolkien really drawing a distinction between an oath and a vow? Because my first thought was, because I looked at the Oxford English Dictionary here, the definition of vow and the definition of oath are actually quite similar. The definition of
they're
oath
similar, but they are different, aren't they? Though
I think they might be. So let's see. So here's the OED definition of oath: a solemn or formal declaration invoking God or a god or other object of reverence as witness to the truth of a statement, or to the binding nature of a promise or undertaking.
Right.
Vow, a solemn promise made to God or to any deity or saint to perform some act or make some gift or sacrifice in return for some special favor. So, let's think about the differences between those two definitions. A vow sounds like a promise to a higher power that I am going to do this in exchange for something, right? In return for some special
Thinking
favor.
like a vow of silence or a vow of poverty,
Sure.
as you go into the, a monastic order, for example, that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a specific act, whereas an oath is, well, an oath can be a specific act too, now that I think about it. That's a bad example.
But looking at the OED definitions, oath doesn't say anything about in return for some favor from the deity.
No, it doesn't. That's the key.
So it says as witness to the truth of a statement. So would the difference be that an oath is you're invoking a higher power to demonstrate that you mean business. You mean what you say. This is true. Whereas a vow is something where you're invoking a higher power to receive some blessing for doing what you're doing.
And you're not even necessarily invoking, you're promising to that higher power, or not always though, because I'm looking at the usage in the text and I see that vow is a much narrower definition.
Give us an
Let's look at some of the examples. So Elrond and Gimli, the little back and forth in the Council of Elrond, Elrond says maybe, but let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. Okay, so don't make this promise to do this thing if you don't know what it's facing. Faramir says that, even if I knew that, still I should take those words as a vow and be held by them, talking about were I to find this thing by the side of the road, right? I have to take those words as a vow. We get in the Muster of Rohan, when they are talking about the history of Rohan, that Brago, a rash vow he spoke, right? And so he had to go and do this thing that he promised he would do. In the Annals
That's interesting. So Brago, there's a vow in reference to Brago, which that kind of shoots my Germanic versus Romance theory kind of out of the water, doesn't it?
It kind of does, right? He passed the door, was never seen among men. A rash vow he spoke as he drained the horn. This was Baldur, not Brago. Sorry. Baldur, son of Brago, not Brago himself.
Oh, right.
Baldur, son of Brago, drained the horn at the feast, which Brago made at Medjugorje when it was first built, and was never seen again because he went to the paths of the dead.
Right.
In the appendices, we get that Eorl vowed that he would avenge his father. And then we even get, this other one about Folka in the second line in Rohan. He was a great hunter, but he vowed to chase no wild beast while there was an orc left in Rohan. So those are...
So that's like three Rohirrim right there. That where the word vow is mentioned. Now, I guess you could argue, these are the appendices, and the textual history is that the appendices were written in Gondor, but I'm not going there. I think the Germanic versus Romance thing is maybe not it's kind of a non-starter for this argument.
But I think the oaths are a little different. For example, if we look at in the Breaking of the Fellowship, which we're coming up on real soon, Gimli says, we, of course, were only sent to help the bearer along the road to go no further than we wished, and none of us is under any oath or command to seek Mount Doom. We're not bound by anything. We have not made a promise invoking God. Think back to the oath, Feanor's oath, who called upon Iluvatar himself that this was going to happen. Similarly, Erkenbrand in The Road to Isengard is talking to the many of the hillmen who had surrendered. And he's telling them they have to help to repair the evil, and afterwards you shall take an oath never again to pass the fords of Isen in arms or march with the enemies of men. You will take this oath. You will make an oath calling upon whatever deities you believe in, that you will not do this thing. And that's different from a vow.
Yeah. Let me throw a monkey wrench into this whole thing.
Oh, no, of course you're going to throw a monkey wrench in there.
All right, no, I mean, maybe not. Maybe it'll actually help us find an answer. Because a moment ago, you quoted the exchange between Elrond and Gimli. Elrond says, let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. Right. That is a response to Gimli. I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, does Elrond say vow and does Gimli say oath? No, they don't. Before Elrond says what I just said, Gimli says, faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens.
Right.
But that is a response to Elrond saying, no oath or bond is laid on you to go further than you will.
Right.
So Elrond says no oath is laid on you. Gimli says his piece, and then Elrond says, don't vow to walk in the dark if you haven't seen the Nightfall.
Ooh.
Is the distinction, now that I'm thinking back to the Rohirrim and their various drunken vows in Medjugorje before they go do something silly, is an oath something that is actually binding before Iluvatar and the Valar, and a vow is just something you say.
A really strong promise. That's kind of that's where I land, because, well, look at the Oathbreakers, right? Look at the Army of the Dead. They had sworn an oath to serve Isildur and fight against Sauron. They broke that oath. And we've talked about this before, that the consequence of breaking that oath is what left them in this state, denied them the gift of men. And that's because Iluvatar was involved in the oath. You can't make an oath in invoking God in Middle-earth without consequences if you break it, which is why you get that argument at the very end of the War of Wrath with Maedhros and Maglor. What do? We need to go do this thing. We need to go try to take the Silmaril, take the Silmarils, but we can't, because if we do that, the whole back and forth about, well, we got to fulfill this because it's better than the eternal darkness.
Yeah, this might be the road that we want to go down, and obviously we're seriously splitting hairs between two very similar words.
We are
two synonyms, but we always say that Tolkien doesn't choose words accidentally.
Right.
I'm looking at the Silmarillion. I just did a word search in the Silmarillion on vow. Beren vowed to reclaim the Silmaril.
Right. But he didn't make an oath. He didn't call Iluvatar and say, let me be struck down if I don't.
I haven't word searched oath. I haven't word searched oath, so I can't say that for sure, but I don't remember him declaring an oath.
No. While you're doing that, let me reference one other oath in The Lord of the Rings. This is a pretty solid one. Faramir is talking to Gollum. This is when he's trying to be convinced that he can lead Frodo away from here. And he says, look, there are locked doors and closed windows in your mind and dark rooms behind them. But in this I judge that you speak the truth. It is well for you. What oath will you swear never to return, and never to lead any living creature hither by word or sign? And Gollum, Master knows, yes, he knows, we will promise Master, if he saves us, we'll promise to it. He promises to Precious. That's his deal. That's his oath. That's his deity, right? There's his higher power that will absolutely destroy him if he proves to be lying here. Different from a vow.
Yeah. I think a vow is an act of promising, and an oath is something that is binding. I mean, you can swear an oath, but the oath really is the binding, isn't it? It's sort of this.
I think so.
It's almost like a binding contract.
You might have just hit on it with the word. You swear an oath, but you make or take a vow. It's different.
Yeah.
It's slightly lesser. And it seems to have a narrower scope. It's usually like a vow to do a certain thing. I vow to take revenge.
Yeah.
Right. Or I vow to do this one thing.
And I'm looking in the Silmarillion just because I have it open in front of me, and I see, again, Beren makes a vow to go get the Silmaril.
Right.
Celegorm and Curufin vow openly to slay Thingol and destroy his people. So there's a lot of promising, like very strong promises, which I think you said a little while ago, and there's promises in exchange for something. That's the way vow tends to be used. Here's an interesting thing. Finrod in the Silmarillion, of course.
Right.
So when Beren comes to him and says, I need your help, I'm going to get the Silmaril and I need your help, Finrod says, Celegorm and Curufin are dwelling in my halls, and though I, Finarfin's son, am king, they have won a strong power in the realm. I fear that they will show neither love nor mercy to you if your quest be told, yet my own oath holds. He's talking about his oath to Barahir.
Right.
And thus we are all ensnared.
Why Beren had the ring of Barahir, yeah.
Right. So there Finrod says he has an oath that holds him to take care of Barahir's son. But then the next paragraph, then King Felagund spoke before his people, recalling the deeds of Barahir and his vow.
Oh no. Oh no.
So there, oath and vow
Tolkien. It's a synonym.
Are both used for the exact same act, the exact same promise. But look at the difference in Finrod's words. When he's talking about what he promised to Barahir, he says his vow, recalling the deeds of Barahir and his vow. That's the promise. Right. When he's talking about the hold that it has on him and the binding nature of that promise, he says, my own oath.
Yes.
And while we are seriously splitting hairs here, I think
very tiny hairs at that.
Very, very tiny hairs. I think that
these are finer than Galadriel's hairs. Don't tell Gimli.
Very much so. I think if there is a significant distinction to be made, I think an oath is the binding, sort of the bond, right?
Yes.
Whereas the vow is the promise,
the action, the thing you're going to do. You know, let me say one last piece, and I think this actually wraps it up really, really firmly. This is from the Silmarillion, and this is in chapter 9 of The Flight of the Noldor. And the narrator tells us, this is about the oath taken by Fëanor and his sons. For so sworn, good or evil, an oath may not be broken, and it shall pursue oathkeeper and oathbreaker to the world's end. You cannot break an oath. It is an impossibility. This kind of oath, an oath that you called by the name of Iluvatar. A vow, you may break your promise, and you'll be a bad person for it. But an oath, you're literally unable to do it. You will be pursued to the world's end. And
right. I think that might be it. I think
so.
Again, really, really fine distinction. But I love the question, and I think
do too.
And who knows? Somewhere out there, somebody's probably going to find an exception to this. Maybe it's the exception that proves the rule. Maybe it's the exception that proves we're full of it. I don't know. But I like the answer we've come up with.
I think so, too. Well, I will say this. Arthur's got a follow-up here. Arthur, you've got a follow-up on that?
Yes, real quick. We were talking a little bit in the chat about this. I note Faramir is a Númenórean, and he says, I said if I saw it on the road, I would not take it, and I don't break my word.
Right.
Aragorn, another Númenórean, back in that same room in Bree where he's got the fake broken sword, says, my name is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by my life or death I can save you, I will.
Yes.
He does not invoke the everlasting darkness, so it's not an oath in that sense.
No,
but
it's a vow.
But the Númenóreans treat this at that level of seriousness, apparently.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
And I was always thought that when Aragorn says that, it reminds me of Finrod and Barahir.
Yes.
So it's Aragorn is doing the same oath that was given to his great, et cetera, grandpappy.
Right.
And someone said that, yes, and in fact, it doesn't mean that he would follow him to Mordor, but he might use the armies to distract Sauron and keep him away from Frodo. So it goes back to that, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that I help you.
Absolutely. And he does take it very seriously. That's quite clear that the honorable Númenóreans like Aragorn, like Faramir, take this as importantly as they should. They take it like an oath. They just haven't sworn an oath. They instead take a vow or make a promise.
Yeah.
Well, folks, I know we told you all that you'd have time for 2 questions, but we are running a little bit short. So we're going to have time for 2, maybe 3 more if they're short. Lori, let me go ahead and see what you have for us. Oh, this is going to be the question about the good and evil that you're originally delaying, right?
Let's do it. Do it. Come on. I'm ready.
No. Actually, I have a short question, and it goes back to a word that you used an hour or so ago.
Okay.
It goes back to applicability.
Oh, yes.
And my personal favorite passage in probably all of the Legendarium is the Ride of the Rohirrim.
Oh.
It every time gets me. I cry.
Yeah.
You know, I've read the book 42 times, and every single time.
Yeah, I'm so with you there.
Given the state of the world today, and looking at the professor's use of applicability, what passage would you pull from? Let's just focus on Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
What passage would you pull to say this is applicable to what's going on right now, and you, dear readers or dear listeners, can take something from Tolkien and use it in your everyday life right now?
Wow, that's a great question, Lori. I mean, so many come to mind. Shawn, I'm pretty sure you already have one ready to go. I mean, I know you're thinking of one, and you just had to go find it, right?
Yeah, I was, and I actually was debating on a second one, but in the interest of time, I'll just go ahead and pick one. This is one that I keep going back to, and I have been going back to for the last few weeks, actually. We're recording this at the end of May. I know it'll be a while before it comes out, but
yeah,
it was just about 2 months ago that both Alan and I participated in the Tolkien Reading Day. I don't know what they called it. Tolkien Collector's Guide.
Oh, that live stream? Yeah.
Yeah, the live stream that Tolkien Collector's Guide put on with the German Tolkien Society and some other folks.
It's pretty amazing.
A lot of people there on this live Discord server reading passages from Lord of the Rings. And I read this particular passage, which if anybody heard that, they know where I'm going with this. I won't read the whole passage because I was reading for 20 minutes or so.
But yeah, let's not do that tonight.
But I'll just do the sort of the end of that passage, which is kind of the impactful part. And it's a passage that means a lot to me right now, with it being May 2020 and everything we're going through with coronavirus. I know we try not to bring up current events too often on the show to keep it evergreen, but that's kind of where we all are right now. And I've been thinking of this passage a lot. So this is from Book 4, Chapter 7, Journey to the Crossroads. And it is Frodo and Sam and Gollum on their way to Mordor.
Okay.
Standing there for a moment filled with dread, Frodo became aware that a light was shining. He saw it glowing on Sam's face beside him. Turning towards it, he saw, beyond an arch of boughs, the road to Osgiliath, running almost as straight as a stretched ribbon, down into the west. There, far away, beyond sad Gondor, now overwhelmed in shade, the sun was sinking, finding at last the hem of the great slow-rolling pall of cloud, and falling in an ominous fire towards the yet unsullied sea. The brief glow fell upon a huge sitting figure, still and solemn as the great stone kings of Argonath. The years had gnawed it, and violent hands had maimed it. Its head was gone, and in its place was set in mockery a round, rough-hewn stone, rudely painted by savage hands in the likeness of a grinning face, with one large red eye in the midst of its forehead. Upon its knees and mighty chair, and all about the pedestal, were idle scrawls mixed with the foul symbols that the maggot folk of Mordor used. Suddenly, caught by the level beams, Frodo saw the old king's head. It was lying, rolled away by the roadside. "Look, Sam," he cried, startled into speech. "Look, the king has got a crown again." The eyes were hollow and the carven beard was broken, but about the high, stern forehead there was a coronal of silver and gold. A trailing plant with flowers like small white stars had bound itself across the brows, as if in reverence for the fallen king, and in the crevices of his stony hair yellow stonecrop gleamed. "They cannot conquer forever," said Frodo. And then suddenly the brief glimpse was gone. The sun dipped and vanished, and as if at the shuddering of a lamp, black night fell.
Wow. That is a great one. For me, I am going to go straight to Chapter 5 of Book 6, The Steward and the King. There is a moment between Faramir and Éowyn that I rarely can read without tears, and I think you'll probably know immediately where I'm going.
I think I do, but yeah, let's hear it.
And so the 5th day came since the Lady Éowyn went first to Faramir, and they stood now together once more upon the walls of the city and looked out. No tidings had yet come, and all hearts were darkened. The weather, too, was bright no longer. It was cold. A wind that had sprung up in the night was blowing now keenly from the north, and it was rising. But the lands about looked gray and drear. They were clad in warm raiment and heavy cloaks, and over all the Lady Éowyn wore a great blue mantle of the color of deep summer night, and it was set with silver stars about hem and throat. Faramir had sent for this robe, and had wrapped it about her, and he thought that she looked fair and queenly indeed as she stood there at his side. The mantle was wrought for his mother, Thranduil of Amroth, who died untimely, and was to him but a memory of loveliness in far days and of his first grief. And her robe seemed to him raiment fitting for the beauty and sadness of Éowyn. But she now shivered beneath the starry mantle, and she looked northward above the grey hither lands, into the eye of the cold wind where far away the sky was hard and clear. "What do you look for, Éowyn?" said Faramir. "Does not the black gate lie yonder?" said she, "and must he not now be come thither? It is 7 days since he rode away." "7 days," said Faramir. "But think not ill of me if I say to you They have brought me both a joy and a pain that I never thought to know. Joy to see you, but pain, because now the fear and doubt of this evil time are grown dark indeed. Eowyn, I would not have this world end now, or lose so soon what I have found. Lose what you have found, Lord, she answered, but she looked at him gravely, and her eyes were kind. I know not what in these days you have found that you could lose. But come, my friend, let us not speak of it. Let us not speak at all. I stand upon some dreadful brink, and it is utterly dark in the abyss before my feet. But whether there is any light behind me, I cannot tell, for I cannot turn yet. I wait for some stroke of doom. Yes, we wait for the stroke of doom, said Faramir. And they said no more, and it seemed to them as they stood upon the wall that the wind died, and the light failed, and the sun was bleared, and all sounds in the city or in the lands about were hushed. Neither wind, nor voice, nor bird call, nor rustle of leaf, nor their own breath could be heard. The very beating of their hearts was stilled. Time halted. And as they stood so, their hands met and clasped, though they did not know it. And still they waited for they knew not what. Then presently it seemed to them that above the ridges of the distant mountains another vast mountain of darkness rose, towering up like a wave that should engulf the world, and about it lightnings flickered, and then a tremor ran through the earth, and they felt the walls of the city quiver. A sound like a sigh went up from all the lands about them, and their hearts beat suddenly again. It reminds me of Númenor, said Faramir, and wondered to hear himself speak. Of Númenor, said Eowyn. Yes, said Faramir, of the land of Westernesse that foundered, and of the great dark wave climbing over the green lands and above the hills, and coming on, darkness unescapable. I often dream of it. Then you think that the darkness is coming, said Eowyn. Darkness unescapable? Suddenly she drew close to him. No, said Faramir, looking into her face. It was but a picture in the mind. I do not know what is happening. The reason of my waking mind tells me that great evil has befallen, and we stand at the end of days. But my heart says nay, and all my limbs are light, and a hope and joy are come to me that no reason can deny. Eowyn, White Lady of Rohan, in this hour I do not believe that any darkness will endure. And he stooped and kissed her brow. And so they stood on the walls of the city of Gondor, and a great wind rose and blew, and their hair, raven and golden, streamed out, mingling in the air. And the shadow departed, and the sun was unveiled, and light leaped forth, and the waters of Anduin shone like silver, and in all the houses of the city men sang for the joy that welled up in their hearts, from what source they could not tell. And that's my passage.
Okay, I could have totally read my two passages for as long as that one was, but I can't even be mad at you.
I will probably shorten that. I'll probably trim some of the earlier parts.
No, I can't even be mad at you because that is like one of my favorite passages in the entire book.
I will be reading that when we get to that moment in season whatever.
I'm not letting you have the whole thing. I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay, fine.
I can't.
As long as I get the part where he finally turns to her and kisses her brow and they hold hands and all that.
Okay, maybe.
Apparently I'm a romantic at heart, I guess. I don't know.
You are, man. You're a softie. I love it.
Apparently so.
This is like my favorite ship in all of Middle-earth, so I'm totally fine with it.
Ship. It took me a minute to get there. Like, what? I don't know. I don't see any sails or masts or oars. Oh, that kind of ship. I got you now.
This is great. I love it. This is like my two favorite characters in Lord of the Rings. You know?
Yeah, me too. You know, because I love Faramir. I mean, he is my favorite character, certainly in the Lord of the Rings. It's a tough call for all of the Legendarium. There's some first stage competition, but boy, he's definitely my favorite in the Lord of the Rings.
And you know how I feel about Eowyn, and Faramir is my second favorite. So yeah, this is a great moment.
Oh, it really is.
I kind of wish I had picked it, but I do love the Sam and Frodo. The moment with the king is one that I just keep going back to. But I mean, both of these passages are kind of the same in a way. They're both about hope. In the midst
they
of
are
darkness.
at a very dark time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is one of those persistent themes that we keep coming back to in the Legendarium, is that idea of hope. shining through.
It always does.
And in both cases, the hope shines through as a light through darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very powerful image in Tolkien.
Yeah, it is. And in a way, it's also a Beowulfian image too.
Yeah.
That circle of light.
The circle of light.
Standing against the darkness. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Shawn, do you happen to remember who we had lined up for the second question after Lori? I know that maybe all again.
Yes, after Lori is Arthur again.
All right. Arthur, what do you have for us, sir?
I'll be brief because time is short, so I will not ask how the books would have been different if one of those small but valuable items that wound up in Lobelia's umbrella had been the ring. And the question I have, if you don't have a ready answer, I will gladly accept. We'll get back to you so that there'll be time for the next person. We are told that there were 9 ships and 9 kings, tall ships, tall kings, 3 times 3. Mm-hmm. What did they bring from Numenor? 7 stars, 7 stones, and 1 white tree.
Yeah.
And Gandalf even says the 7 stones were the Palantir.
Right.
However, we're told that the stone of Erech was a big stone that Isildur brought out of Numenor, which makes 8 stones.
Ah.
And we're also told that there's the Star of Elendil, which we presume is one of these 7 stars. We don't hear about the other 6. And I've always been curious if anybody has any thoughts on that. And again, if it's one of those, we'll think about it so that we can have one other person have a question. I'll be more than happy to yield the time.
Well, it might be one of those. We'll have to think about it and get back to you another time because we have no clue. I don't know. Shawn, what do you think?
I
entirely possible.
I do not have a clue. I was thinking about the 7 stars passage not too long ago and wondering which 7 stars are those. I think I was thinking of it when we were at Kheled with Gimli a few episodes ago. And, there's the 7 stars of Durin's crown. And I was trying to think, is this the same 7 stars? Is it the same as the Valakirka or the Big Dipper? What's going on there? But I don't really have an answer for it right now.
I don't either.
As for the 7 stones, I mean, maybe the 7 stones are the Palantiri, and maybe the Stone of Erech was just
another stone.
One.
It wasn't part of the poem.
It's not referenced in the poem, but it's just, somebody else had another stone, and chances are somebody's wife or daughter had some jewelry, and there were some more stones there. But
sure,
I don't know. That's a really good question, especially about the stars.
That's the thing. I think the stones thing, you're on it as well, Shawn, that the poem is referencing the 7 stones, the Palantiri.
Mm-hmm.
There were going to be other rocks. There are going to be stones somewhere on
somebody else on this boat has a rock.
Right? Yeah. And so the Stone of Erech is just not envisioned in that line. But the 7 stars, what about the other 6? That's a legit question.
That's a very good question, answer. Yeah.
That's one that I don't think... I have a hunch there's not really an answer for that, but we will look into it, and that's one we'll have to hold off on tonight.
Yeah.
But folks, I do think that's going to have to wrap it up tonight. Thank you for the great questions and discussion. We really appreciate you joining us for Questions After Nightfall, and we hope that you can join us again for the next one. Now, to everybody listening, we hope you can join us next week when we get back to the book with the first part of Book 2, Chapter 9, The Great River.
Oh, man, we are getting dangerously close to the end of the book, and to the end of this volume, the end of Fellowship.
That's true. Yes, we are. Of course, that means we're dangerously close to giving you all time off from the podcast as we get ready for the 2 Towers.
That's right.
Yeah. In the meantime, listeners, we want you to remember that the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony.
That's right. We've always got lots of discussion happening in our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you'll find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode, as well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook and click the like and follow buttons.
And now we have another common room, this time on Reddit. You can find some great discussions there at r/PrancingPonyPod. And as always, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @PrancingPonyPod. So follow us wherever you happen to be. And please consider sharing us on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you happen to find Tolkien fans.
And please also consider giving us a review on Apple Podcasts. I know I say this every episode, but the more reviews we have, the more visible the podcast is, and that helps others find us and this great community of Tolkien fans we built together. Still growing, but we want everybody out there to be a part of it, so please give us a review.
Finally, if you'd like access to exclusive content like postscripts, quarterly specials, PPP swag, and more, check out patreon.com/prancingponypod to find out how you can join the Fellowship of the Podcast. And as always, folks, we want to thank everybody who's listening, but we want to give a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier, a couple of whom are with us tonight. James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, Mario in Utah, Seth in Texas, Ella in California, Joseph in Texas, and Kathy from North Carolina. Thank you all so very much.
And make sure you don't miss a single episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, and, well, most of all, your best questions and corrections to the answers that we've given today to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
Yeah, Barliman's finally taking the hints that I drop at the end of each episode. He's actually finally getting better with the mail.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And your question or comment may be featured on an upcoming show.
And as always, folks, this really has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable, well, not just listeners, but question askers. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.